All right, well, good afternoon to you. It's time to talk a little weather. And of course, we are officially into the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season, day 5. And things, fortunately, are still on the quiet side. But as we've been telling you, all of the really important forecasts that we look at closely calling for a super busy season. Now, of course, usually the busiest time of hurricane season would be closer to August, September, and October. We're just at the beginning of June. It's not unheard of to have a tropical system this early on in the season, but at least things are quiet for now. But of course, it could get active in a hurry. And there are some models indicating by the middle of June, maybe mid to late June, we could start to see a little action in the tropics. But for now, just a few showers and storms for parts of the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, fairly quiet, although those waters are super warm. And into the Atlantic, we've got a few clusters of showers and storms blowing up around the Caribbean islands, but nothing at this point that we are monitoring that could turn into a tropical depression, tropical storm, or a hurricane, at least over the next few days. In fact, National Hurricane Center thinking that we should stay fairly quiet, not just for the next 2 days, but for the next 7 days across the Atlantic basin. So that is certainly some good news. And let's try to keep this map the same way as long as we can. Of course, we've got 6 months of hurricane season to get through. And like I said, the two main forecasts that we look at calling for a very active season. Of course, that's the Colorado State University forecast calling for 23 named storms, 11 hurricanes, and 5 of those becoming major hurricanes of category 3 or greater. And of course, the 2024 NOAA forecast that came out a little bit earlier this year calling from anywhere from 17 to 25 named storms, which is well above the norm of 14. Out of those, 8 to 13 becoming hurricanes. That's above the average of 7 hurricanes taken from 1991 to 2020. Finally, between those 8 to 13 hurricanes, NOAA thinking that 4 to 7 of those will become major hurricanes, and normally we only have an average of around 3 major hurricanes per season. So why the super busy forecast from both of those organizations? Well, it's because we've got some very warm water temperatures out there. In fact, I just did a query of some of these water temps across the Gulf, sea surface temps, and even down into parts of the Northwest Caribbean. And it is super balmy, super warm, like bath water out there. We've got temperatures in the 80s, so we certainly have the heat to help to fuel any of these tropical systems that could start to pop up. We also have another change in what we call the El Nino phase, which is expected to switch to La Nina, which is a climate pattern, and that usually spells more trouble for us across the Atlantic basin. Usually when we flip-flop back over to La Nina, that means warmer waters and also less wind shear, and that usually spells more tropical activity. When you have a lot of wind shear in the upper levels of the atmosphere, that kind of helps to tear upper levels of the storms apart, and they can't really survive as well when that's going on. So with the lack of wind shear, those storms can kind of stay together, hold together longer, and that gives them a higher shot of reaching some of these Caribbean islands, maybe the east coast of the U.S., and maybe even pushing into parts of the Gulf Coast. Of course, that is when we start to get concerned. So nothing happening at this point, but of course we are watching the tropics. We're tracking things closely, and of course, if we start to see anything that looks troubling, we will certainly let you know. Here's a look at some of the names that we'll be going through for this hurricane season. These are the names for the Atlantic basin. Of course, there are a different set of names for the Eastern Pacific, but for the Atlantic basin, we'll start off with Alberto for our first named storm and go all the way down to William. And of course, we may have to transition to that secondary list of names if we start to get more than 21 named storms for the season. So bottom line, things are quiet now, but we are monitoring the tropics closely. Of course, generally for June and July, we don't have a ton of action. We don't really expect too many tropical storms or too many hurricanes, but look how things really start to ramp up for August and especially September, where we have the peak of hurricane season right around September 10th. Even into October, we can still be fairly active before things start to kind of fall back off for November. And in December, we're out of hurricane season. Not unheard of to have a tropical system that late, but it is pretty rare. So that's what's happening across the tropics. Not much for us.